But I want to just acknowledge a few folks in particular. I want to thank our board member, Dr. Lutz, for coming. He's on sabbatic leave, but so devoted to Oglethorpe is he that he is here in between visits to Trinidad, and I'm not sure where you're going next. Where did you say?
Colorado.
Heading off to Colorado, doing an incredibly busy sabbatical, but thank you for coming. I want to thank Leah Tonko, so I'm going to point you out in the crowd, for her idea that this might be a show that we could have at Oglethorpe. So it's completely your fault that the IRC flight portfolio is on view. And then also it's Daniel Hammond's fault because he is an Oglethorpe alumnus who's in development at the IRC and has studied with Dr. Lutz, and he completely supported that idea as well. So the beautiful show that's in the center gallery, the IRC flight portfolio, is what has inspired this, and you should take a look. I'll be talking at a later date about the portfolio and the fellow Varian Fry who inspired its creation. But tonight we're going to talk about displaced persons, refugees, and it's an incredibly important topic for everyone, particularly in this political season. So we're really happy to have J.D. McCrary, who is the director of the Atlanta chapter of the International Rescue Committee. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I've got about 15 minutes worth of prepared remarks, and then yeah. And there, Fiona, do you want to point out here are the full packets. Who has the front row over here? I believe has the actual full packet, and everybody else has a variation of it, which is driving Fiona crazy. Yeah. So make sure you get the full packet. Maybe I'll move this a little closer since we're a little bit smaller of a group. So I've got about 15 minutes worth of prepared remarks about the global refugee crisis, about IRC, who we are and what we do. And then what I'd really love to have is more of a dialogue, more of a conversation. So please, all of the questions that you might have that might be generated during the talk. Is the camera okay?
Yeah,
Did I mess you up on your camera frame? Okay.
Right.
Okay. Please hold on to those, and I would love to answer all of those after my remarks. And we can. I'll be happy to answer questions for as long as you're happy asking them. So, thank you all so very much for this opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you specifically to Oglethorpe University Museum of Art for hosting our flight portfolio, which I hope you've had the opportunity to view in the other room. I'm going to back it up just a little for a little more light. Sorry. It's okay. I'm here today as the Executive Director of the International Rescue Committee in Atlanta, or IRC. And after 2 years, I'm the outgoing chair of the Coalition of Refugee Service Agencies, or CRSA. The IRC responds to the world's worst humanitarian crises, helping to restore health, safety, education, economic well-being, and power to people devastated by conflict and disaster. Founded in 1933 at the behest of Albert Einstein, the IRC is at work in over 40 countries and in 29 U.S. cities, helping people to survive, reclaim control of their future, and strengthen their communities. The IRC leads the humanitarian field by implementing high-impact, cost-effective programs and by using its knowledge and experience to shape both policy and practice. At the IRC, I have many responsibilities to ensure our nonprofit organization operates effectively and efficiently. This past year, we served more than 4,000 unique clients across a variety of programs. Of this number, almost 400 households were assisted in achieving economic self-sufficiency through employment. 695 individuals were assisted in applying to become U.S. citizens. And 1,039 were enrolled in our adult education programs, including cultural orientation, multi-level English classes, and vocational skills training. 1,081 of those clients were newly arrived refugees that we resettled here in Georgia from countries as diverse as Burma, Bhutan, Syria, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Iraq. These are only a few of the active and extensive programs we offer, but from my point of view, I only have two overarching goals to accomplish. One is to get as many people out of harm's way as possible, and two is, once they are safe, to ensure that our clients get the support they need to help themselves become self-sufficient as soon as possible. I pursue these goals through a variety of avenues, but one way has been as the chair of the CRSA, a 14-member coalition of refugee service agencies. CRSA's mission is to engage a broad coalition to highlight the cultural, social, and economic contributions of refugees and immigrants in Georgia. We want to spread the good news to others, like yourselves, about what those of us privileged to work with refugees and other victims of forced migration already know. That refugees and immigrants are beneficial to our communities in many tangible and intangible ways, and that the hospitality the South has long been known for is still very much alive and well. Well, we can see how that goes at 9 p.m. tonight. We'll see. One of the 15-minute sections is on immigration tonight.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see how immigrants and refugees are represented. Anyway, I digress. At the IRC, we see the welcoming tradition of Georgia personified daily through our volunteers and community supporters. We simply could not do our work without our partnership with teachers and schools, business leaders and employers, temples, mosques, and churches. Every week we receive countless calls and emails from supporters living across Georgia who want to donate their time and resources to help our refugee neighbors. People are looking for ways to respond locally to this global crisis. This year alone, our volunteers have devoted over 47,000 hours of service. From the retirees who have attended every week for years, to volunteers in our adult education programs, to the elementary school classes who sort through the numerous clothing and houseware donations we receive for our resettlement shop, our volunteers continuously prove that Georgia is truly deserving of its welcoming reputation. Unfortunately, in today's political environment, there is a vocal minority who will go unnamed who would like to close the U.S. border permanently to everyone not born here, effectively renouncing one of the key tenets of our founding and ignoring one of the primary contributions to our nation's success, that of welcoming the immigrant. Refugee resettlement is a long and proud tradition in this country, aligned with our national values of freedom and opportunity. We all have refugee ancestors, and we all know this nation was built by immigrants. The fear of refugees and the toxic political rhetoric of the past year will only increase if refugees are scapegoated rather than helped. This past year marked the 35th anniversary of President Carter signing the Refugee Act into law. Refugees are a minority of overall immigration to the U.S., but since 1980, almost 2 million men, women, and children facing persecution have found a safe home in America. The United States has historically been a beacon of freedom and hope for the world's most oppressed and persecuted. And our communities have proudly welcomed these families as part of the fabric that make our nation great. But there is more work to be done. Some refugees will simply never be able to return to their home because of who they are, what they have been through, or the conditions under which they fled. They cannot go home, and they cannot create a new life in their host country that they fled to. So resettlement to a place like the United States is their only option. Today, only 1% of refugees globally are provided with the durable solution of resettlement each year. leaving 99% in desperate limbo in neighboring countries or languishing in refugee camps. The global statistics are staggering and overwhelming, almost paralyzing for those of us attempting to alleviate this suffering. But we must remember that every one of the 65 million people globally who have been forced from their homes are individual human beings with their own personal story of struggle and survival. The only difference between them and us is they have been forced to flee their homes through no fault of their own. What would we and our families do when faced with the unimaginable terror of persecution? Where would we go for help? Would we want to find a welcoming community to restart our lives? Even if the refugees we welcome into our state were an economic burden, as some incorrectly and unsubstantially say they are, I am sure you would agree that we would still have an obligation as fellow humans to welcome them. Currently, the need is shocking. 1 in every 113 people in the world are now either a refugee, internally displaced, or seeking asylum. The refugee crisis in Europe is dominating global headlines for a good reason. More people are fleeing war and conflict than at any other time since the Second World War. And millions of people are at risk of serious and lasting harm. Since the conflict in Syria began over 5 years ago, almost 12 million people, 1/2 of the country's population, have been forced from their homes. These are people who have lives that you and I would recognize. Much like us, they were once able to live peacefully. They had jobs, took their kids to school, celebrated family milestones, and held their families close and dear. All of this has been torn apart by a war they have no control over, and they want nothing more than to find a way to live a peaceful and stable life. Over 4 million Syrians have fled to neighboring countries, overwhelming their capacity to host the refugees. As a result, millions of people are now seeking refuge outside the region, especially in Europe. To put it into perspective, imagine if the entire population of Wyoming, Maine, Rhode Island, Hawaii, New Hampshire, North and South Dakota, Idaho, Delaware, Montana, Vermont, Alaska, and the District of Columbia combined were forced to flee or face certain death. In September, the U.S. met President Obama's target of resettling 10,000 Syrian refugees in fiscal year 2016. While this milestone demonstrates clear progress, there is an urgent need to do much more. We encourage the White House to consider this 10,000 milestone a floor and not a ceiling. The achievement of the 10,000 target proves what is possible, but there remains an urgent need to further strengthen U.S. leadership in resettling refugee families fleeing violence and war. Those who have the ability to help also have the responsibility to help, and the U.S. has a moral obligation to respond in a far more robust way. The United States should lead the world in making concrete commitments to refugee resettlement and providing a tangible show of solidarity with the host countries already shouldering the vast majority of the responsibility to provide safe haven to refugees. For example, Jordan, one of the most water-starved nations on the planet, hosts more than 630,000 refugees from Syria, which is proportionally equivalent to the United States absorbing the entire population of the United Kingdom. Lebanon hosts over 1 million, with Syrians constituting between 1/4 and 1/3 of the total population. Turkey, which has taken in almost 2 million Syrians since the beginning of the conflict, has become the largest refugee hosting country in the world. It has put the annual cost of hosting Syrian refugees at $4.5 billion. Without support from the international community, refugee hosting countries can no longer provide for this vulnerable population. America's acceptance of only 10,000 Syrian refugees is comparatively meager. Canada has already resettled more than 30,000 Syrians since the end of 2015, and the city of Munich welcomed 25,000 refugees over just one weekend in August 2015. The recent announcement of the Obama administration's intent to resettle 110,000 total refugees from all countries in 2017, up from 85,000 this year, is good progress, but remains a small fraction of the global need. And the threat of some members of Congress to shut down the government to keep refugees out of the U.S. is not helpful and downright inhumane. While Syria and Syrians have been the focus of the world's attention, let us not forget the refugees from Somalia, Burma, Bhutan, Palestine, and dozens of other countries. Even as the global conscience has been pricked by the images and stories that have been conveyed around the world, European governments have fallen into squabbling over border fences, border security, and burden sharing. We must strive to remember, at the heart of this crisis, however, are human beings in danger who seek only a safe haven and a compassionate and helping hand. I know from personal experience how much refugees value the safety and freedom that America offers and the opportunity to start a new life here. In 2015, the IRC in Atlanta resettled a family of 6 who have been struggling as refugees in Uganda for years after fleeing violence and conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, their home country. On arrival, Tony, his wife Nyota, and their 4 young children exuded warmth and happiness, so relieved and grateful for the opportunity to start their life over in America. Tony and Nyota made it clear that their first priority was to find work to provide a stable home for their young children, who had no memories of life before becoming refugees. They both had high levels of English, college education, and an incredible drive to succeed. We considered them perfect candidates for our career development program. Working closely with his employment specialist, Tony was able to find a position with one of our employer partners, Curry & Company, a local Atlanta lighting manufacturer. Dedicated to staff development, Curry & Company offers all employees 100% tuition for post-secondary education, an opportunity that Tony was thrilled to take advantage of. He has just recently enrolled at Georgia Piedmont Technical College to obtain an Associate in Applied Science degree. Nyota has found a part-time position in a grocery store, and while grateful to be able to contribute financially to the household, she was determined to build a more meaningful career for herself. Like Tony, Nyota was a star student of our career development program and has just recently started working towards a Child Development Associate certification with hopes of starting her own child care business to provide services to other refugee families. Balancing employment, further education, and 4 young children, Tony and Nyota are just one example of the many hard-working refugee families we resettle in Atlanta each year. Yes, there is an initial investment in the humanitarian relief associated with forced human migration. That investment, however, is not wasted, as some say. The return on investing in refugee resettlement is proven and extensive. Resettlement agencies such as ours work to help refugees gain employment as soon as possible after their arrival. In Georgia, the collective self-sufficiency rate at 6 months after arrival for refugees is consistently between 85% and 90% of all households, one of the highest in the nation. Additionally, a recent survey by the Washington-based Migration Policy Institute found that refugees were, in fact, more likely to be employed than the American-born population. A current study by Kalina Cortez, a Texas A&M researcher who followed refugee and non-refugee immigrants who arrived in the U.S. in the late 1970s, found that it took refugees a few years to become established. But soon, refugees were out-earning non-refugee immigrants and adding more value to the economy each year than the entire original cost of receiving and resettling them. Refugees appear to play an outsized role in creating new jobs and even raising the wages of Americans nationwide. One reason is that refugees, like all immigrants, appear more likely than others to open small businesses. Security concerns of welcoming refugees have been overstated. Refugees undergo the most extensive background check of any entrant to the United States. They are required to pass numerous in-person interviews by trained experts and multiple security screenings by national security, defense, and intelligence agencies, based on biographic and biometric evidence. General George Allen, the head of the White House's ISIS task force, recently stated he has confidence in the Department of Homeland Security's ability to keep the refugee resettlement program secure. By welcoming refugees, the United States both helps to stabilize countries hosting hundreds of thousands of refugees and provides a powerful counter to the false narrative that groups like ISIS want to promote, that this country opposes Muslims. Being a refugee from oppression has remained at the core, being a refuge from oppression has remained at the core of who we are as a nation since our inception. George Washington, one of our most respected founding fathers, once stated, "The bosom of America is open to receive not only the opulent and respected stranger, but the oppressed and persecuted of all nations and religions, whom we shall welcome to a participation of all rights and privileges." Thomas Paine, a man heralded as the father of the American Revolution, declares, "The United States should be an asylum for the persecuted lovers of civil and religious liberty." And the Constitution, a document in whose Bill of Rights, I remind us all this evening, protects not only the citizen, but any person against being deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process. I am glad to announce that despite the national rhetoric, cooler heads are prevailing, and adherence to the core freedoms of the Constitution remain who we are and who we will continue to be as a nation. Georgia, specifically, has had a tremendously successful history of hospitality towards the world's most persecuted people. 283 years ago, the founding of Georgia had its roots in providing asylum for the persecuted. General James Oglethorpe landed his ship of 114 individuals fleeing the inhumanity of corruption on a bluff next to the Savannah River in my hometown. This group was warmly welcomed by the native inhabitants, the Creek Indians, who pledged their friendship. Both those refugees arriving in 1733 and today's arrivals are able to maintain their human dignity and succeed because Georgia remains a safe and welcoming state. Our clients and refugee friends are human beings who have faced and survived the worst atrocities humans do to one another. At the very least, their homes and communities have been taken away. Yet the refugees we are fortunate to have as neighbors have maintained their human dignity and commitment to succeeding despite seemingly insurmountable challenges. Refugees and immigrants are a model of resilience we should all emulate. Governor Nathan Deal stated it best earlier this year when he proclaimed, "Georgia is a welcoming state filled with warm, friendly, and loving people. Our cities and countryside are populated with people who worship God in a myriad of ways and in very diverse settings. Our people work side by side without regard to color of our skin or the religion we adhere to. That is the character of Georgia. I intend to do my part to keep it that way." Well, so do I, Governor Deal. So do I. Thank you. So we can have some questions, or we can have a conversation. I'll try not to move around too much. I know my natural habit is to wander through the crowd. That's right. I know that was a lot of information. There's a lot of data in there. It's a very complex situation. Each, all of the refugees from various different countries each have their own set of reasons, behind the persecution of becoming refugees. So it is a very, very complex geopolitical conversation that changes daily. And it's very, very difficult to keep up with it. Just to give you a little bit of background, and I'm going off script, these guys are making these guys nervous now. A little bit of background on the IRC and what we do. Once you go through all of the overseas checks and all of the hoops and all of the things that you have to go through, and the very select few that are deemed worthy of being granted refugee status and are invited to the United States, you are assisted in traveling to the U.S. You make it all the way to Atlanta, to baggage claim, and that's where we meet you. And that's where our relationship with you begins. And we provide the social services that you need to assist you in achieving the self-sufficiency and household stability that I mentioned in my remarks. Yes, ma'am.
I guess that clears up part of my question. I was wondering when you begin that relationship with the refugees. So you would not be facilitating all the vetting to bring them into the country, but
No,
you
ma'am.
meet them at immigration. And then that's an incredible success rate. 85 to 90% of families are self-sufficient after 6 months. So if they are or are not self-sufficient, do you continue to follow their progress? Do you keep that relationship going?
Yes and no.
Okay.
That's a great question. We provide, a series of very specific services, and then the relationship somewhat changes into services that the family might need that are specific to the household or specific to the family. Some families need more assistance, some families need less. And so we'll continue working with them. Their case manager will stay with them, sometimes for years, for some families that need that kind of ongoing service. That's rare, that kind of relationship. But it kind of tapers gradually. And it's somewhat interesting in the fact that, it's a little bit tough in our social service model, because we don't necessarily know that this is the last time the family's going to come to see us. They decide what their needs are, and they don't necessarily know that either. Just one day, the next problem or the next thing that they need help with comes along, and they can do it themselves. So they don't necessarily make their way back to their caseworker or to any of our specialized programs. And then you see them a year later at the grocery store, and nice to see you, how's the kid, that sort of thing. Yeah.
But not connecting is actually positive, because
Yes.
they've gained independence.
Yeah, and the key is, our model is very much based on ensuring that the family is as self-sufficient as soon as possible. And that is somewhat in, I don't know, not contradiction to. A lot of people assume that our role is to support them as long as possible. It's actually the opposite. It's to get them so they can support themselves as soon as possible. So some families, that's 2 and 3 months. Again, that's on, it's a bell curve. 2 and 3 months is really short. 2 or 3 years is really long. A lot of folks, it's in that first year. Or they'll come back for very specialized services, such as immigration or immigration service to adjust status or become a citizen. We'll provide that, so they'll come back and see us. We provide a variety of levels of adult education and youth education. So, the family, the high school student in the family may be in our after-school program for years, but they're not necessarily receiving case management type services for new arrivals as we think of it. So there's a lot of touch points that, they can kind of come in and out from. Oh, yes ma'am.
Okay, so I guess this is like a general question. So you're talking about these numbers of like refugees that other countries are letting in, and then you say the United States only let in like 10,000.
Well, 10,000 Syrians, 85,000 total.
Okay. Okay. Why is this unit specifically like having such a hard time letting in refugees?
Well, it's a couple of things. One is the history of the program. Another is the politics of it. A third is the funding. The U.S. has a very specific model that does require a congressional outlay of resources. So there's, we wouldn't be able to resettle 2 million, Syrians like Turkey has using our model. Because we have a model that supports organizations like ours where families get the assistance they need when they arrive. And there's not near enough infrastructure or funding to support those kinds of volumes of people. So that's part of it.
And do you know sort of like the repercussions of what would happen for this program depending on who becomes president?
It would go probably 2 different ways. Yes, and that is a concern. There have been remarks made about shutting the program down, and I don't know that they're necessarily idle threats. Yes, ma'am.
I can't imagine any party objecting to what you're doing with your type of vetting and your type of funding and your success rate. Don't overstate the other side.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I've been at one of your galas, and one thing that struck me in relation to what you were just talking about is that it was very clear that a number of people who had been settled as refugees and had done well were returning the favor and were very active participants at a fundraising event like the gala. Am I not right?
Yes and no. There are definitely some who were resettled many years ago who are now business owners and college graduates and homeowners, and you'll see quite a bit. And they will come back to see us. Recently we had, Kasim is Afghani, is he not? Right around we're in North Lake, just behind North Lake Mall, and right on the Vista, the SunTrust Bank, right on the Vista, the manager of that branch is an Afghani refugee who came as a I wouldn't say a teenager or younger, a little bit younger, and who is now from Afghanistan. He was resettled by us, and has come full circle a generation later. He's the manager of the SunTrust right around the corner from us, and he wants to give back, and he's coming over to our office, and he's asking how he can support us and that sort of thing. So absolutely, it does happen, and we have a variety of stories like that. And they may not be in such close proximity, but we'll certainly see names come through, donations come through with names that we recognize and things like that. I would love to see, a significant involvement from folks who've been resettled, because it really is. They do realize how important it is. Mr. Nguyen, who came in just this past week, he himself was not a refugee, but he fled Vietnam. He was already out of Vietnam at the time, but then his family came to join him as refugees 30 years ago, and he was just telling us that story. And he came into our office and came on an office tour, and that was the first time we'd met him. So it does come up quite frequently, not infrequently, but we'd love to see more. Love to see more, absolutely. And there's that interim period where you really are, focused on your lives. If you've got kids in school, we're all busy when we have kids in school. We understand that sort of thing. And then just like everything else, once the kids are out of college, and you're free to pursue some other interests, that sort of thing. Yes, ma'am.
So for donations and volunteering, like what your organization needs the most?
Oh, Dan is our development manager. Do you want to answer that, or
what does our donation need the most?
Yeah, and just like, do you guys need a lot of clothes, or like a lot of like, I don't know, like hygiene supplies.
I'll say it. You want me to say it?
Yes, the answer is yes. The answer is always yes to all of those things. Generally speaking, I think financial contributions tend to go the farthest because we're able to allocate those funds to programs where needs arise, but we don't necessarily have the funding right away. But that said, we have a resettlement shop. Actually, that might be a good second point that we could talk about some of the programming that we have. The resettlement shop is a shop that's like a thrift store. We collect donations. Everything is free to the refugees who first arrive, and this is sort of their first experience, sort of in a retail environment in the U.S., and they learn how to shop for clothes, but it's all through donations. And we do quarterly drives right now. The big need is infant and children's coats. Coats in general, because it's that time of year. It's a big coat drive.
And all clothing donations are, like, if you bring us donations, it's tax deductible. So we'll give you like a letter to thank you, and you can file it with your taxes as well. So it's like a gift.
Well, and
But any
Daniel,
clothes you want.
I was just going to say, didn't you and I talk about the possibility of maybe we didn't, but a CCE day of service, and I talked to Leah about this, and you know, Oglethorpe students like to get very involved in the community, so I think that's probably happened before with IRC,
It has, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But it can certainly happen
we'd like
again.
to do it again.
Yeah. I've been talking to Patrick Grayshaw, so
Yeah.
we could get something together.
Yeah, and I did talk to Duncan Dale, who's our volunteer coordinator. Leah can actually speak to our volunteer program. She was an intern this past summer. That's another area where we always do a lot of outreach. We ask for, particularly if you're a college student and you're interested in these types of programs, we have several different areas that you can get involved in and contribute time and earn college credit too, if you like, as part of your program process.
And just to quickly interject to answer your point about what kind of donation items we really need, I actually volunteered in the resettlement shop for 6 months, so you kind of get, and Leah knows, like, bird's eye view of like what they need the most. Kitchen supplies. Stuff you wouldn't think about, toiletries. One day I brought in some 4 samples of like perfume, snapped up in 5 minutes. So like stuff that makes people feel normal, that normalizes their life. Toys for children. So if you can't give financially, there's just so many different ways you can give back and have an instantaneous impact on people.
And also, an easy thing is you can like us on Facebook.
Share us on social
Share us
media.
on
Yeah, because we
social
put everything, any drives or anything we need, like we put on Facebook. And also just for volunteering, like our biggest need for volunteers right now is in our adult education classrooms. So we have like all different classes, like different levels of English. You don't have to have like teaching experience, we have different times of day we really need, just because we've had so many new clients and they're all really keen to learn and be in our classrooms, and we just could use a few more hands. So if anyone's interested in that, contact details are on the flyer.
And the advocacy request that's on the half-page sheet. That doesn't cost you anything. That's 2 minutes out of your day tomorrow to make 6 or 7 or 8 phone calls, and it will go a long, long way. It really does. There were 51 pieces of either negative or anti-refugee legislation in state houses last year. All but most of them did not pass, but Georgia had none. And that is a direct result of a lot of hard work in the advocacy category that we've been doing for the past 5 and 6 years. Yeah. And I don't know that we're going to be that lucky this year.
That's why this is so important, because the more people who voice their concerns to their Congress, and it makes a difference. They listen.
I'm curious to know how many people, if you know the figures, how many people pursue citizenship and how many people have a permanent residency. I know it can be difficult. My son is an immigrant, not through refugee status, but he's got a green card.
Yeah.
He's only 9.
Well, refugees are required to what's known as adjust your status. So
Okay.
adjustment of status after 1 year from arrival. So refugee is kind of the global term, but it's also your immigration status for your first year here. And so that gives you a lot of, many of the rights and privileges of a green card holder, but not all of them. Most importantly, it allows you to go to work as a refugee. But after 1 year, you are required to adjust your status to lawful permanent resident, so green card holder. 4 years after that, you have the option of becoming a citizen, so 5 years from arrival.
You have to wait that 4-year period?
You do have to wait that 4-year period. But that is not required. That's obviously optional. And there are some, there are obvious advantages of becoming a U.S. citizen, and we certainly promote it. We would love to see 100%, but it's expensive. The fees for citizenship are very expensive, especially if you're a large family. There is a certain English requirement that is not extensive, but also not necessarily easy. You're not going to achieve it just if you don't actually, pursue learning English over the 4 years. And so some people are not necessarily ready right at the 5-year mark. It may take them a few more years. It may take them double that. Most people in our experience, I don't have exact numbers or an exact percentage, do ultimately become citizens. Not everyone, but most. Yeah, and certainly I would say virtually all have that as a goal. They want to, but some things do get in their way of becoming citizens. Yes, ma'am.
You said after a year you have to adjust your status from what to what?
From refugee to lawful permanent resident. So that's you as a green card holder, what we would think of as a green card holder. Yes, sir.
Could you maybe address the situation of what sometimes gets termed economic refugees as opposed to political? And I'm thinking in particular, sort of Europe's been hit by a double whammy of people coming from Syria because of the war, but many people coming from Africa simply for economic reasons.
Yeah, and in economic, the term economic refugee has been used in a variety of ways,
yes.
and it's been given some certain loaded background with it. Certainly it can be argued that if you're an economic refugee, some of them are, in the long history of human beings, immigrants who are looking for better economic opportunities elsewhere, and that's how we populated the globe. And there's an aspect of that. Then there is also definitely another version of it where you have people who are not necessarily being persecuted, but they may literally be starving to death. And so you send your oldest son out to find work, another common human characteristic over the millennia. And so that sometimes they go to where the money is, which is in more developed countries, and so it can very much appear to cross over, and so the term gets muddied and muddled, and you there's no good way to kind of pull them apart. Some are doing okay and they're just seeking better. Some are truly in dire situations, even though they're not being persecuted by another human being, but they're clearly not thriving and not even surviving in some instances. And so they're acting in their own best interest and looking for resources elsewhere. You'd almost have to take, each group individually and split them up and have a discussion all the way around the rationale. But certainly, resources and safety are driving a lot of human migration. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am?
Can you touch on how you work with like refugee children and getting them into elementary schools or middle schools?
Oh, that's a great question. We enrolled 391 kids last year. We just calculated all this information. That's why I have all these numbers on my head. And that was in I want to say 19 different schools, mostly in DeKalb County. About 6 or 7 different elementary schools, 5 or 6 middle schools, and 4 or 5 different high schools. And we have a person. Her name's Kenya. She's our school specialist, and her sole job is to navigate the school enrollment process and to support students and parents through that process. And so that's her full-time job, is taking kids, making sure they have the right paperwork, making sure they get enrolled in school, advocating to make sure they get into the right grade, educating parents about American schools and the differences and that sort of thing. So we have a full-time person that does just that, and she stays very busy.
And also, like, to add, like, all of our new arrivals, all of the children were enrolled in school within 30 days of arriving in Pentagon. So, like, within 30 days, they're all in school, all school-age children.
And that would be within 2 weeks if it weren't for the medical paperwork that's required to enroll kids. You got to wait till your health screening to get to sign the school forms. Otherwise, it would be even faster.
Do they have to go through any English training or anything?
DeKalb County, specifically DeKalb County, does a very good job. They really are a model for not just refugees, but immigrants coming into the school system. And they have what's known as an International Student Center, where you're tested and your transcripts are evaluated if you have them. And some students are assigned directly to the school that they would be geographically assigned to anyway, and some go to the International Student Center to support them with English and other classes to bring them up to speed until they can be put into their district school. And that's for middle and high schoolers. Elementary kids, because they're so much smarter than all of us, go right into the classroom and do so much better and learn English within a year or two, which has a unique impact on the household. If you think about it, when your children speak English and you don't, it makes for some interesting household power dynamics and further complicates your parental roles. Is something that we see quite a bit. But the kids are much more, very quick to pick things up.
Is that International Center in Chambly?
It's in Toco Hills, right? No, it's moved. It's on Memorial Drive now. It was for years. It was in Toco Hills, or on Druid Hills, across the street from the Target there, and the next to the QT in that big school building. It's moved over just off of Memorial Drive now into
right near, it was near Briar Cliff. I know that.
Exactly. Yeah, it was right there in that big DCSD complex.
It's now empty.
Half of it was empty. Now it's all empty. Is my understanding. And they've moved to another school on Memorial Drive. And we have an after-school program in the International Student Center, and we do. We wrote a grant specifically for this because what we were finding is adults, when they arrive, are given quite a bit of what we call intake and cultural orientation and household orientation and marital orientation, employment, all these orientations to show you to give you information on how to survive and succeed in your new environment. But the kids were not necessarily getting this, so we developed a 6-week curriculum for new student orientation in the International Student Center. And we have cohorts go through these 6-week, and we can't serve all the kids. We just serve as many as we can with the funding we have. But they go through this orientation to help them get adjusted, to support them specifically in what they need to know to survive in an American school. And then we also have an after-school program at Clarkston High School. Yeah.
We're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Great question.
Incredibly good work. Going back to our little lives where we're doing things that are not saving the world. It's difficult.
It's a unique work environment. Let's say that. You're all welcome to come visit. Did you want to say something? How was your internship? Put you on the spot. Yeah.
I loved it. It's probably my favorite work career development experience that I've had.
Oh, interesting. It's very hands-on. It's very tangible. You are not left in to go sit on the sidelines and file and that sort of thing. It's very right there. Get the work
asked to
kind
get
of place.
coffee or get dry cleaning. Or
Yeah.
Has that ever happened to him? Maybe. Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you get a great deal of direct service, and you get it on day one, just because there's so much to do and there's so much need.
And you've had Oglethorpe students over the years.
We have. Oglethorpe's one of our many universities that we've partnered with and had some great interns come through. We average about 40 to 50 interns a semester. And so they come from a variety of schools. And Oglethorpe, Agnes Scott, Kennesaw are some of the best ones. Georgia State, Emory. Yeah, we kind of draw a little bit from a lot of. Well, Atlanta. I mean, if you have an internship program in Atlanta, you have a lot of great schools to draw from.
over the summer, including myself, there were 3 interns from Oglethorpe. And if any of you are interested in interning over the school year, the IRC office is only like a 15-minute drive down to the campus. Very nice.
Great. Yeah, we couldn't do it without you. That 47,000 hours that I calculated to put in this is the equivalent of almost 25 additional full-time staff. Yeah, so I mean, it's just a tremendous amount of work that we would not be able to do without the interns and volunteers. Thank you.